One of my favorite genres that I never really explored was Metroidvanias. My favorite game series of all time has become Metroid over the past few years, and I genuinely love every entry in the series. But in the past 8 years or so, the genre has exploded with fantastic games and an endless amount of content. I feel like a lot of people will agree that the catalyst of this genre has been Hollow Knight, one of the greatest games ever made. Over 300,000 reviews on Steam, with it being overwhelmingly positive. It's a game that introduced a lot of people to this genre. I will say it's a double-edged sword because some of these clowns that love Hollow Knight can't watch a Nintendo Indie Direct without getting mad that Hollow Knight Silksong isn't mentioned. Really? A Nintendo Indie Direct? You think that's where Silksong's gonna magically drop? Regardless of how long it takes to release, this genre will continue to exist and strive. 2024 has been an incredible year for Metroidvanias, and I usually only do top 10s for roguelites because it's my most played genre by far, but this year I wanted to squeeze in Metroidvanias as well because, well, I played a crap ton of them, so let's talk about the best Metroidvanias of the year. Starting the list off is Gestalt, Steam, and Cinder, which released July 16th. This is one of the more simple Metroidvanias on this list and potentially the most straightforward. You play as Alethea, a rogue-style swordswoman, and the game, it's beautifully made with incredible pixel graphics and a very nice soundtrack, but it lacks a few things, mostly in combat. Throughout the game, you level up and it does have a pretty big skill tree, but all the upgrades are relatively the same, and some are locked until you unlock a new weapon or ability. The game was just fine. Good enough to make this list, but just fine in the end. I felt the story was pretty predictable, the bosses were incredibly easy to me, and the combat was kind of easy as well. But the more usual things with Metroidvanias did somewhat shine in Gestalt with collectibles and a few upgrades. It wasn't hard to 100% as I did everything in about 12 hours, but it's a good pickup if you want a simpler, somewhat more linear Metroidvania. I always like to sneak in a few sleeper picks on these lists, and this next one has less than 100 reviews as of this recorded, and it's a game I have a lot to say about, and it's Exophobia. It was released July 22nd, and this is a boomer shooter inspired Metroidvania. Immediately the combat will remind you of classic Doom and Wolfenstein. You can only aim on a horizontal axis, and dying, you will lose all your progress from the last time you saved. Those are the biggest boomer shooter inspirations, I'd say, obviously minus the graphics. Overall, I enjoyed almost everything with this little gem. The combat is pretty simple, but the bosses stand out a little more compared to your average enemy. The upgrades are mostly attached to your gun, which will help you explore the ship more as you progress, but you do gain a teleport later in the game, so that's definitely very nice. And the story, it's not that long. The game only has 4 levels on the ship that you're stuck on to explore, but where this game struggles immensely is with how vague it is. Before an update, the game had a system where your map will die and you need to go charge it to continue using it. That did not help with how vague it was, as I was always going to save, but even with being able to disable the option of having the map die, the game is still incredibly vague and you will most likely get lost a handful of times. That's the biggest negative of the game. The color palette might not be everyone's cup of tea, but you can change it if you find some unlocks. Overall, I like the game, but I can totally understand if people do not like it. Hell, a lot of people don't like boomer shooters. But regardless, this was my 9th favorite Metroidvania of the year. Biomorph is next, which released April 5th, and like most games in this genre, it's an action platformer. You play as Harlow, who seems to have lost their memory and is trying to save their friend Cleo. You explore a world that seems very dead. The setting has an apocalyptic feeling to it, and it plays well like most Metroidvanias with upgrades that allow you to explore new areas, a lot of fun collectibles. But one thing Biomorph does different, and I'll say this is the most unique thing about it, is the ability to transform into the enemies you fight. Throughout the entire game, which is pretty long, it took me over 20 hours to 100%, you steal the abilities from enemies and you can transform into them whenever you want. Granted, you have their soul, I guess is what I'll call it, loaded up. You can load up 2 animal souls at a single time, but that allows for a lot of different variations with combat and a lot of puzzles to solve and collectibles to get by transforming. You also get memories and chips to have more passive upgrades. Overall, this is a nice game. Some animations in game can seem a little basic, I guess, but the story is nice, collectibles are fun, and I think the ability to transform into enemies is well executed. The game also has some nice little small cutscenes with animations that are, playable. Here's a game that didn't get much of a chance with a certain crowd, and it's Bo Path of the Teal Lotus. It was released July 17th, and yes, it looks a bit like Hollow Knight in some areas, but please give it a chance. The core combat can be compared to Hollow Knight. Is it as good? No. Not many things are, but the combat is still tight, fluid, and feels nice to execute crazy combos. This game does a lot of things very well. The biggest negative I have to say is the final boss, and that's just because it was 6 phases long. Granted, there were only 2 movesets for you to learn, but still, 6 phases was too long. It's a 15-hour story and has a good set of upgrades for you to unlock and evolve your movement tenfold as the story progresses. You can find tons of side quests from NPCs, lots of upgrades for basically everything, and a good amount of collectibles to find in the game. The soundtrack is another positive thing about Bo. It might not have totally lived up to my somewhat higher expectations, but I still view almost everything in this game in a positive light. If you crave Hollow Knight, trust me, try this. Number 6 is an overwhelmingly positive game with over 3,000 Steam reviews, and it's Minishoot Adventures. Some might have a hard time qualifying this as a Metroidvania, but it is a bullet hell top-down shooter with even some Zelda inspirations with the puzzles that you solve. You can unlock stronger shots, movement abilities, and have a good amount of upgrades that you can respec and change whenever you want. It's another one of those that can be beaten fast, as I've beaten it in 7 hours, but the game runs incredibly well, and I had 0 issues whatsoever. Most PCs can run this game. The enemies don't have much variety, but they do get harder as the game goes on, and you even have a good amount of unlocks to keep you exploring for a long time. If I recall, the game doesn't tell you much on where to go, so it's not a super linear game like others on this list, but it's still incredibly satisfying to play. And here's where some people's number 1 game is gonna be, and it's Animal Well at number 5. Yep, only number 5. I didn't enjoy this game as much as others, but I still respect it and did somewhat like it. Hey, it's number 5 on the list, but it was released May 9th, and this game does a lot of things incredibly well. Most impressively, the game is only 33 megabytes, but the gameplay is still special. You don't have any combat in the game, it's more so just puzzles everywhere. It doesn't tell you anything, really. The only hint I remember while playing the game was if there was a squirrel on the screen that you scared away, I was somewhat on the right track. I did like the game. Like I said, not as much as everybody else, but for what it's conveying, it does it incredibly well. It's filled with so many secrets and paths for you to find with the few items you do receive. I love that bubble wand and somehow missed it in my first 8 hours. And that's one of the fun things that doesn't really happen with any other game on this list. You can easily miss something and not even realize it. It's vague, it's hard, I liked it, but it is one of the few games I did not play to 100%. After 13 hours and rolling the credits, I was content with what the game brought and would still recommend it to almost anyone, if they're patient. I'll admit, this game at number 4 almost was number 5 and Animal Well was almost here instead, but I decided that this game was more enjoyable for me, and it's Biogun. It was released July 31st, and you play as a vaccine inside of a dog trying to kill a virus. Biogun is special though to me. It stands out mostly with variety inside of combat to really change the game for you. The bosses are pretty fun, and there's a lot of side content with quests and bosses even to really make a 100% run more fun. You gain multiple weapons to fight with and to get over obstacles with, while still gaining new movement abilities like a double jump. I will admit that the main enemies aren't really anything super special throughout the game, but genuinely the bosses, pacing, ease of traversal, upgrades, so many things made this an enjoyable experience. I do wish it was available on more platforms, as it's only available on Steam as of recording this, but in the near future I think that complaint will be redundant. Number 3 is probably the easiest game on this list, and I view it to be a perfect introduction to Metroidvanias if you are new to the genre, but still a great pickup for seasoned veterans looking for a more relaxed time, and it's Crypt Custodian. It was released August 27th and made by Kyle Thompson, who has made 2 other Metroidvanias with Islets and Sheepo, but Crypt Custodian is a little more heartwarming than others. You play as a recently deceased cat, and you get assigned to clean up hell as a janitor. Throughout the game, you meet other animals who are stuck in hell and help all of them. One of the main collectibles in the game is a set of 3 photographs for every friend that you meet, and those photos will tell a sad and short story of their lives. Now, with the sad stuff out of the way of this game, let's talk about everything else quickly. You get a lot of abilities with special attacks and badges. Special attacks are simple. Hit enemies enough and you can use them. Badges can be equipped for passive buffs. That leads to good combat inside the run, and it's not too complicated. If you play a good amount of Metroidvanias, you probably won't die that much in general with this game. The bosses are good fun, and they might surprise you with a few attacks, but it's a very relaxed game. Fun upgrades, a good amount of badges and special attacks, and an option to have the game be more linear with the ability to buy hints. That is something I do appreciate a lot more Metroidvanias doing as of late. making the game not so vague to appeal to a wider audience. But if you still want that hard Metroidvania feeling and not knowing where to go, that's still available to you. This game was honestly number 1 until I played these next 2 games, but it's still great. Number 2 could easily be number 1, and it's actually from one of my least favorite companies with Ubisoft, but it's Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. I don't agree with Ubisoft a lot, and I hate their dang Ubisoft launcher that I needed for this game, but this Metroidvania was just incredible. You play as Sargon, and you're trying to save the Prince of Persia, who was kidnapped by an immortal. I can't tell you everything with the twists and turns of the story because I don't want to spoil it, but it's incredibly well done. All the upgrades you receive are fun, unique, and enhance Sargon exponentially. Prince of Persia also allows you to have a more linear Metroidvania if you want it, where the main quest is shown on the map so you don't get lost, which I think is still a very, very good thing. The combat is fun and hard. The extra challenges that aren't needed are incredibly fun. Collecting everything is super satisfying, and all the bosses were dazzling to fight. And the DLC added a good solid extra 5 hours of content that you can do super early in the game, which was good for my playthrough because I played this game incredibly late, even though it released in early January. This game is one of the best I played this year, and I got a solid 30 hours out of it while doing everything on the second hardest difficulty. It also reminded me a lot of a more melee-based Metroid Dread, which was one of my favorite games of the year a few years back, so overall, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, just a great experience. I praise Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. It really is something special, and it could easily be number 1. But the number 1 game was really no contest this year for Metroidvanias in my eyes. And number 1 is Nine Souls. Where do I begin with this masterpiece? Not many games in this genre will get out of the mainstream audience. Of course, Animal Well did. Prince of Persia was a big name as well. But Nine Souls really shocked everyone. It's overwhelmingly positive on Steam with over 16,000 reviews for a good reason. You play as Yi, and you just woke up in the Peach Blossom Village after being asleep for several hundred years. You befriend a kid named Shan Shan, and he is a very integral part of the story. And you also befriend another villager named Shay Nong, and he is also another integral part of the story. Now, for the juicy stuff of this game. Combat, incredible. A lot of people compare it to Sekiro, with it revolving heavily around parry and enemy attacks, and with that, I thought I would suck at this game because I am not good at parrying. But the window of opportunity is high for it, and it's very easy to learn. Every single enemy has a moveset for you to learn and master to parry against. I died so much to just so many common enemies, but it was still fine. The bosses, on the other hand, oh my god, incredibly challenging, but so rewarding when you actually win. I struggled with a good amount of them, even the final boss on the perfect ending for doing everything. It took me 5 hours total to win against them. But the feeling of satisfaction for winning, I haven't felt it on a level from Nine Souls since I played Elden Ring. The combat with parrying is just magnificent. You have a skill tree to upgrade as the game goes on, and you have little jades to give passive buffs. It's perfect. And then there's still lots of collectibles and a super well-made story that I beg you to fully get the good ending on this. It tugged at my heart, and I was so sucked into this game. The collectibles are also great. I could gush about this game for 30 minutes in a video, but there is no contest on what is the best Metroidvania of the year. It's Nine Souls. It is perfection. While these 10 are all great games, there's still a lot of incredible Metroidvanias out there that I didn't have time to play, like Void Route or Skelethrone: The Chronicles of Arakona, or even games that I did play but just missed the mark for me with Pinball Spire or Tales of Kenzera. Good games, but just missed the mark. Regardless, it's been a great year of Metroidvanias, and I can't wait to see what comes next. Let me know your favorites of the year that I missed, or maybe your favorites in general in the comments. That's all I gotta say, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.